Coming up on New Day at Arirang, business leaders of South Korea and Japan met on Monday and called for leaders of their countries to hold a summit to address pending bilateral issues and help restore economic ties. The latest remarks signify the efforts of the private sector to overcome the bilateral rift. South Korea took part in the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Switzerland on Monday. There, Ukraine says their war-torn country needs $750 billion for a three-stage reconstruction plan, much of which they believe should come from the assets confiscated from Russian oligarchs. Police are still on the hunt for a gunman who shot and killed 6 people during a 4th of July Independence Day parade near the U.S. city of Chicago. The suspect is believed to have fired at the crowd from a rooftop using a high-powered rifle.
Hello and welcome to New Day at Arirang. It's Tuesday, July 5th, 8 a.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. I'm Arirang.
And I'm Yoon. Thanks for tuning in this morning, because over the next hour, we'll be giving you a look at some of the biggest news of the day and, of course, experts' insights on key issues facing Korea and the rest of the world. Now, our top story this morning, business exchanges, cooperation, and dialogue between South Korea and Japan will help improve bilateral ties.
And that's according to President Yoon at a meeting of business leaders of both countries held for the first time in 3 years. Jeong brings us the highlights from that session.
Seoul-Tokyo economic ties can serve as the catalyst to restore bilateral relations. That's according to South Korean President Yoon who met with the representatives of the Japan Business Federation, or Keidanren, on Monday and discussed strengthening economic cooperation between the two countries. President Yoon said business representatives from South Korea and Japan holding their first official meeting in 3 years in Seoul could be an important milestone in revitalizing exchanges between the two countries. He added that the business leaders working together as reliable partners has been a pillar of the Seoul-Tokyo relationship and called for continued conversation. Masakatsu Tokura, chief of Keidanren, told President Yoon that both sides confirmed their will to expand economic cooperation and maintain friendly ties. He also expressed hope for high-level diplomatic meetings between the two countries. The Korea-Japan Business Council was convened earlier on Monday by South Korea's Federation of Korean Industries and Japan's Business Federation, which are major business lobby groups of the two nations. The meeting had been held every year since 1983, but was stalled for 3 years due to the pandemic. The two sides discussed removing export curbs and resuming a currency swap between the two nations. They signed a joint statement to improve cooperation and build a better relationship. This comes amid frayed bilateral relations after Tokyo implemented export curbs on Seoul over industrial goods essential to tech industries and amid other historical disputes arising from Japan's colonial rule. Jeong, Arirang News.
South Korean citizens and the government will work together to draw up ways to mend long-standing diplomatic rift with Japan over wartime forced labor compensation. The inaugural meeting of a joint consultative body with civil society marked the beginning of the Yoon administration's full-fledged efforts to resolve the matter. Kim Dami tells us more.
Diplomatic efforts by Seoul to arrange direct negotiations between the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor and related parties in Japan to finally resolve the matter. That's what the victims asked for on Monday from the South Korean government at the inaugural session of the Government Civil Society Task Force.
We ask the South Korean government to invoke diplomatic protection as a power recognized by the Supreme Court decision in 2018.
Diplomatic protection is when states act on behalf of their citizens whose rights have been violated by another state. It came up in 2018 when South Korea's top court ordered Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel Corporation to compensate the victims. The Japanese firms refused to pay, citing Japan's official position that all reparations were settled under the 1965 accord that normalized the bilateral ties. This refusal led to the Korean victims of filing lawsuits, which they won, to have the company's assets in Korea seized. Led by the first Vice Foreign Minister Cho Hyun-dong, Monday's session brought together government officials, experts, as well as the attorneys of the victims and their families. Ahead of Monday's meeting, the attorneys told reporters that the Japanese companies have not responded to communication in any shape or form and stressed that it would be a rational move for the firms to negotiate with the victims. If such talks do take place, they said, the lawsuit to seize their assets could go in another direction if the victims agree. The companies have appealed the original court ruling, so the liquidation of their assets has not yet begun, but the Supreme Court is expected to rule on the appeal in the coming weeks or months. The victim side further warned that the task force should do more than just gather opinions, or they may reconsider their participation. 김다미, Arirang News.
After attending the NATO summit last week and a series of bilaterals with world leaders, President Yoon Suk-yeol emphasized global solidarity to address economic challenges while meeting with senior officials on Monday. The South Korean leader called for follow-up measures on the agreements he reached. Yoon Sung-min has the details.
Global solidarity to resolve economic difficulties. That was President Yoon's key message to his top aides during the first meeting of such kind since his trip to the NATO summit in Madrid last week.
우리 경제 상황이 매우 어렵습니다. 많은 국가가 인플레이션과 공급망 문제에 위기감을 갖고 가치를 공유하는 국가 간의 이 연대를 통해 해결해야 한다는 공감대가 있었습니다.
To tackle various economic challenges, the president emphasized meticulous follow-up measures to the multilateral meeting, a message he reiterated during his working lunch with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo.
경제 문제는 국내외가 따로 없습니다. 또 경제 안보 관련한 순방의 후속 조치에 최선을 다해 주시고 대통령실이 부처와도 수시로 협의해 주시기를 당부드립니다.
Follow-up measures to the handful of bilateral meetings Yoon had on the margins of the NATO summit range from ways to expand cooperation on nuclear energy, semiconductors, and arms sales, to establishing a South Korean mission to NATO in Brussels, bolstering talks with the rest of AP4, namely Australia, Japan, and New Zealand, as well as increasing humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. But at the end of the day, Yoon's primary goal circled back to stabilizing people's livelihoods and reviving the household economy for the average Koreans. Since his return from the NATO summit, President Yoon's focus has mostly been on tackling economic challenges at home amid rising prices and growing global uncertainties. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
S&P projects South Korea's annual inflation to hit 5% this year. Its latest report cited higher energy and commodity prices as key factors. The global ratings agency forecasts the nation's economic growth to be at 2.6%, 0.1 percentage point up from April. It said the Asia-Pacific region's expansion is expected to be smooth, with the exception of China, which is struggling due to a resurgence of COVID-19. Meanwhile, citing Nomura Holdings, Bloomberg reported that Seoul will see a minus 2.2% economic growth in the third quarter, and that South Korea, along with countries including the UK and Japan, could enter a recession at some point over the next 12 months.
Now, in the meantime, South Korea's foreign exchange reserves dropped for a fourth month in a row last month, seeing its biggest decline since the 2008 global financial crisis. The Bank of Korea said on Tuesday that foreign exchange reserves, a barometer of financial stability, came to around $438 billion. That's down about $9.4 billion compared to May. The BOK attributed the decline to the stronger dollar affecting non-dollar assets, and it's also due to the fall in deposits at financial institutions, as some assets were sold to stabilize the volatile exchange rate. Around 90% of South Korea's foreign exchange reserves are securities. At the end of May, South Korea's reserves were the 9th largest in the world. China had the largest reserves, followed by Japan. Now, South Korea is on course to post its highest number of COVID-19 infections in 40 days, with some 17,000 reported as of 9 p.m. last night. That's about 3 times the number of cases reported at the same time the previous day, with the figure set to rise once the results of tests done up until midnight are accounted for. This comes as domestic infections are slowly picking up again due to waning immunity and increased movement of people. Though the number of severely ill patients and the hospital occupancy rate remains at a stable level, concerns remain as the summer holidays could fuel the spread further. Now, the National Assembly finally looks set to resume with a new group of speakers elected. But it will still take some time for urgent bills to be passed as rival parties can't agree on ways to share standing committees. Lee Kyung-eun brings us the updates.
Lawmakers have elected five-term legislator and former Deputy Prime Minister Kim Jin-pyo as South Korea's new parliamentary speaker. It paves the way for the much-delayed start of the second half of the 21st National Assembly.
While working for the government, I was known as Mr. Tuner. What I ask of you all is to be good communicators and to compromise. I will be a speaker who is good at moderating.
This comes after the People Power Party and the main opposition Democratic Party reached a last-minute compromise to convene a provisional plenary session following a month-long dispute over how to share standing committees for the next 2 years. And their agreement was to deal with the very issue after electing new speakers first.
We requested the Democratic Party appoint heads of standing committees with bipartisan agreement in exchange for our party cooperating with electing the speaker and vice speaker.
We accept the proposal. I appreciate the People Power Party's decision to cooperate in electing the speaker, and I hope the two parties can also work together to swiftly form standing committees.
While forming a total of 18 committees, the fiercest battle is expected to be on the Judiciary Committee, that functions as the upper house in South Korea and serves as the final gate before bills are put for vote. The DP, in exchange for giving control of the Judiciary Committee to PPP, is calling for cooperation in launching a committee to set up a special investigative body. That's a follow-up measure to the latest law, which the DP pushed through on its own using its majority power, aimed at stripping the investigative rights of the prosecution. The PPP, which had boycotted the passage of the bill in the first place, rejects that. Instead, it's proposing that the committee's membership be equally shared by the two parties under the chairmanship of the PPP. The National Assembly is currently facing mounting pressure to quickly pass bills aimed at taming inflation, like increasing fuel tax cuts. The sooner the standing committees are formed, the sooner those bills can be passed. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
And it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into some of the key issues in the spotlight right now. South Korea was able to finally approve its first domestically produced COVID-19 vaccine with SkyCoV-1, developed by SK Bioscience. Now, it's certainly a huge step forwards in the country's push towards easing its dependency on imported vaccines.
But just how effective is SkyCoV-1, and will it be enough to convince South Koreans to continue to get vaccinated, even though it is towards the tail end of the pandemic? Well, we're going to find out as we connect with Dr. Kim Seung-taek, virologist at the Zoonotic Virus Lab at Institute Pasteur Korea. A very good morning to you, Doctor.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us today. And well, first of all, could you tell us more about this new vaccine produced by SK Bioscience and tell us about its efficacy as well as how it's administered?
Well, this vaccine, as you said, is called the SkyCoV-1, and also is called as the GBP 510. And this is a recombinant subunit vaccine, and which is actually very similar to the Novavax vaccine that was developed just earlier in the U.S. And then this vaccine is administered to the people over ages 18 years of age, and then this is given just 2 shots with an interval of just 4 weeks. And I have to say, the vaccine was actually just developed by development is actually just an outcome of just multiple collaborators. And then the vaccine design was actually provided by the Institute of Protein the Design at the University of Washington. And there's some the adjuvant, which is actually enhances immune responses upon just vaccination. And this adjuvant was actually provided by the GSK. And then the funding was actually came from the Gates Foundation and the SEPI, as well as just the Korean government. And then some clinical development was actually led by the SK Biosciences. And then in terms of some clinical trials, well, previously we have seen typical traditional clinical trials, which is actually comparing the vaccine efficacy against some placebo control. But here we are actually the clinical trial was a little bit delayed. So then the actually enrolling a large number of the participants was actually really difficult. So alternatively, the company actually chose the immunological correlates of protection, which is actually basically just comparing the vaccine efficacies against the other approved vaccines. So in this case, the SK Biosciences use the AstraZeneca vaccine as some control. So in the end, after analyzing all the immune correlates, which is actually about how much antibody is produced, and also how the other cell-mediated immune response is actually generated. So based on all the outcomes, this vaccine seems to show some better efficacy against the AstraZeneca vaccine. So which is actually pretty good news.
Yeah, I think amongst the future vaccine recipients, the efficacy is going to be very important. But what's interesting, I found out, I started getting the flu vaccine a couple of years back because the government was pushing for that. I noticed the South Korean public, they were more keen on getting vaccinated using the domestic flu vaccines as opposed to the imported ones. Do you think it's going to be the same way where, South Koreans, when they continue to get vaccinated with COVID-19, they will eventually prefer the domestically produced vaccines more?
Well, first of all, as I told you earlier, this vaccine is recombinant subunit vaccine. So in terms of safety, this is actually better than the mRNA-based vaccines or the virus-vectored vaccine. And then obviously, some people actually suffered from some adverse effects by the mRNA vaccines and the some virus-vectored vaccines. So which is actually negligible in this kind of recombinant subunit vaccine. And then obviously there seems to some competition issues. And then, unless some other vaccines such as mRNA vaccines mRNA vaccine show any obvious advantage over this vaccine, I think this SkyCoV-1 would be some preferable vaccine in Korea. And also at least this year, there's some contract issues, and our government already ordered a lot of vaccines from outside, some Pfizer vaccines, Moderna, and the Janssen J&J vaccine. So in this situation, I don't know how many demands are actually being made for the new vaccine generated by the SK Biosciences.
Right, and with vaccines like Pfizer, the ones developed by Moderna, already dominating the market, Dr. Kim, some say that SkyCoV-1 is rather late to the market. So how useful is it having this vaccine on the market right now? Is there going to be continued demand for this?
Well, actually, that's why many people actually already were vaccinated by some other vaccines, as well as many people actually got immunity by the natural infection. So it's tough. But the future prospects is many experts say that maybe we need more vaccines because the virus is actually evolving, and so maybe some current vaccine may not be very best for the currently or future evolving future emerging this SARS-CoV-2. So one of the advantages maybe we can come up with some optimized, upgraded vaccine to come up to deal with these new emergencies. And also, so I think in addition to the giving these vaccines to general public, I thought it's a development experience is very important. I mean the finishing of phase 3 clinical trial is really challenging. So in our side, I think finishing the all clinical trials and then finally succeeded to the development of the vaccine is really a precious experience.
So, Dr. Kim, I guess the big question now is what's next for South Korea, right? And now that we do have this domestically produced COVID-19 vaccine, I mean, is it going to open doors to bigger things for South Korea?
Well, I think Korea, just recently, we have been very good at least just manufacturing the vaccines, which are actually developed by some foreign companies. But at this time now, we have just shown our capability that we can actually develop our own vaccines. So, which is actually would give us some more opportunity in terms of contributing the global health by sharing the vaccines that we have developed, and also we actually showing our capability that we can be the global partners to develop the vaccines for our global health issues.
Well, thank you very much for your insights today, Dr. Kim. We look forward to speaking with you again.
Thank you.
All right, with that's going to wrap up the first half of New Day at Arirang.
But do stick around. Coming up in the second half, with South Korea, the US and Japan moving to ramp up trilateral cooperation amid tensions on the Korean Peninsula. How is North Korea responding to all of this? Well, we're going to find out during Global Insights, so don't go away. We'll be back in just a moment.
Share South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduce a Korean New Year. The Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
넌 볼 수 없고 가질 수 없어 뚝뚝 뭘 쏟아내도 뜨거운 자태 한번 비추지 않고 내게만 가치란 그녀는 유명한 화이 서울의 별다 어딨나 In your eyes 걔와 함께면 넌 디스토피아 내 발걸음 따라오면 유토피아 나의
I feel so good right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
We're back with the second half of New Day at Arirang. At least 6 people have been shot dead at a July 4th Independence Day parade in a Chicago suburb.
That's right, and city authorities say the shooting began shortly after the event in the city of Highland Park began on Monday morning local time. At least 24 people have been also hospitalized. Police are still searching for the suspect, who they have described as a young white man. The shooter appeared to have targeted the parade's attendees at random. Residents have been urged to stay at home and contact their loved ones to make sure that they are safe. Nearby suburbs have been locked down, while local parades and fireworks shows have been canceled. Now, in the meantime, Iran's top diplomat has criticized Washington for failing to be constructive during the latest round of nuclear talks held over in Doha, Qatar. According to Tehran's foreign ministry on Monday, the statement was made during a phone conversation between Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian and his French counterpart on Sunday. However, the Iranian official did say talks held on the 29th and 30th of June were positive, while stressing that Tehran is serious about reaching a, quote, good and lasting agreement with the U.S. Now, Ukraine says $750 billion is needed for its plan for a three-stage recovery following Russia's brutal invasion, which has resulted in over $100 billion of direct damage to the country's infrastructure. Kim Yo-sun has more.
$750 billion is what Ukraine estimates will be needed for the country's recovery in the wake of Russia's invasion. Addressing major international leaders during a two-day Ukraine recovery conference in Switzerland, the Ukrainian Prime Minister explained that the direct damage to the country's infrastructure totals over $100 billion.
Today, the direct infrastructure losses of Ukraine stand at over $100 billion. More than 1,200 educational institutions, more than 200 hospitals, thousands of kilometres of gas pipelines, water and electricity networks, roads and railway tracks were destroyed or damaged.
He then added that a three-stage recovery plan is needed. This, he says, involves immediate recovery of what is critical for people's lives, fast recovery, as well as a long-term transformation. He also highlighted that the key source of recovery should be the confiscated assets of Russia and its oligarchs, adding they should be responsible for the war that they have unleashed. Against this backdrop, Ukrainian forces were taking up new defensive lines in the eastern part of the country. This comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin hailed Moscow's victory after months of battles fought over Luhansk. During a televised meeting, Putin congratulated the country's forces on what he described as the, quote, victories in the Luhansk region. The battle is seen as the closest Russia has come to achieving one of its objectives since its forces were defeated trying to capture Ukraine's capital city in March. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. North Korea on Sunday fiercely criticised South Korea, the United States and Japan as the three nations came together to boost their trilateral military ties against the North's nuclear and missile threats. Pyongyang warned that the move calls for the regime to reinforce its own military capability amid weeks of speculation by experts that the regime is in fact gearing up for its seventh nuclear test. We discussed the latest developments with Dr. Bruce Bennett, policy analyst at RAND Corporation, and Professor Kim Jung, professor at the University of North Korean Studies. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us this morning. And my first question to you, Dr. Bennett. Now, North Korea says that the trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo materializes Americans' plan for an Asian NATO. Now, do you think the regime is going to use this as a mandate for scaling up its provocations?
Well, North Korea looks for lots of rationale for scaling up provocations, so they would do it whether or not there had been meetings going on. They would be working on that. I think we have to recognize in this case, though, that South Korea-Japan cooperation is only a part of what the United States is working in the region. And also that South Korea and Japan are working. They participated in the NATO summit. Other countries from Asia joined them. There's increasing cooperation among the countries around the periphery of North Korea and China. And I think North Korea is going to find that very disagreeable and try to take action against it and certainly complain a lot about it.
And Professor Kim, well, there are definitely concerns that North Korea is going to scale up its provocations. And well, according to Daily NK, top Workers' Party officials in North Korea, they discussed targeting the Yongsan presidential office, saying that the regime could hit it within 3 minutes. Now, does it actually have the capability to do that?
So as far as the conventional capability is concerned, that statement is far from, say, credible, because it's true that most of the conventional capabilities now concentrate on near the DMZ area, so they can target the Yongsan area, including the presidential office, but the quality of the conventional capability of North Korea has been deteriorated. So I think that's more like the rhetorical threat against the new government of South Korea, as well as the ROK-US alliances. But if the North Korea can acquire the so-called the tactical nuclear capability through the seventh the nuclear test, then story will be dramatically changed. So if North Korea has the say tactical nuclear capability, then that kind of rhetorical threat now become in the future more credible one.
Professor Kim, when North Korea does conduct its seventh nuclear test, then it may be able to produce small tactical warheads that could be loaded onto a short-range ballistic missile system. And well, its KN-23, though, with its 600-kilometer shooting range, that could strike any part of South Korea. So would our current missile defense systems work effectively against this kind of threat?
So thus far, the South Korea's nuclear deterrence system is based on so-called three-pronged defense strategy, which is based on basically conventional capability. The first pillar of that is so-called kill chain, which means basically the preemptive strike strategy, which has some deficiency in terms of detection as well as the implementation. And second pillar will be the KAMD, so aka the Korean Aerial Missile Defense, which is also now getting dubious for the present situation because the North Korea is now developing the hypersonic as well as the multiple the vehicle, the capability here. So the only thing that the North Korea can have some serious consideration is so-called KMPR, which is the Korean Mass Punishment and Retaliation strategy, which is basically the decapitation strategy. So as far as the KMPR seems credible for the North Korea, then there will be some the stable deterrence situation in the Korean Peninsula, but at the same time we have to recognize that there's some incomplete and deficiency of some the missile defense the system as well as the preemptive strike in terms of the conventional capability of South Korea.
Right, and Dr. Bennett, US allies like South Korea and Japan, they've been very alarmed at the amount of short-range missiles that the North has been launching, which could easily reach both countries, of course. And while some are still questioning the promise of extended deterrence for US allies, those that rely on America's nuclear umbrella. And with the redeployment of tactical weapons to the Korean Peninsula seemingly out of the question, what other options are available? Would a system like the European Phased Adaptive Approach missile defense be somewhat of a plausible option?
Well, we have to recognize that the European phased defense system is based upon the SM-3 interceptor. The SM-3 is designed to be an exoatmospheric interceptor. It means it's intercepting very high altitude, 80 or 100 kilometers or more in altitude. The KN-23, which North Korea has been testing, only goes up to 50 or 60 kilometers. Therefore, it would not be going within the range of the SM-3 unless substantial changes were made to it. Instead, we need a mixed defensive system. The missile defense needs to involve some amount of Patriot capability, THAAD capability, which goes down to 30 kilometers altitude and could certainly address the KN-23. Also, some amount of SM-6, a different version of the SM-3 missile. So a different mix, But that still doesn't mean that the U.S. is not willing to offer extended deterrence. U.S. extended deterrence is extraordinarily powerful. The United States, for example, could take one of its submarines with nuclear weapons on it in the Pacific and dedicate it to North Korea. Much as the U.S. did in Europe during the Cold War, it dedicated several submarines to supporting NATO. So that kind of dedication could be done and not put nuclear weapons on the peninsula where North Korea could target them. There's lots of options available to the U.S. I think extended deterrence is very dependable right now.
And Professor Kim, what do you see as the possible options? Is trust towards extended deterrence still an issue for South Korea and Japan?
Yeah, first of all, we have to admit that there's no 100% certainty about the extended deterrence. That's true. But we have to also consider the consequence of, say, for example, abandoning South Korea, Japan from the perspective of the United States. That means the total collapse of the global extended deterrence system, especially in relations with the alliances, not only in East Asia, but also the other regions in the global area here. So in that sense, I think the United States has the huge stake in maintaining and increasing the credibility of the extended deterrence. And in that sense, I think the South Korea still have some good sense of the maintaining the extended deterrence provided by United States, and the ROK as well as the United States need to repeatedly confirm the credibility of the extended deterrence provided by the United States.
And Professor Kim, well, during the NATO summit in Madrid, Fumio Kishida, in a trilateral summit with the leaders of the US and South Korea, he floated the idea of holding a trilateral military drill. And, well, do you think that's likely to happen? I mean, what are the next steps for the Seoul, Tokyo and Washington collaboration in addressing the North Korea threat?
Yes, I think so. The only thing that is still need to see is the timing of the joint drill between the ROK, Japan, and the United States here. And the only obstacle for that kind of trilateral military cooperation is basically the domestic political backlash expected in South Korea as well as in Japan. For Japan, I think it is critical for the Kishida government to win the upper house election coming in the July 10th. If they can get a comfortable majority in that election, then they can have more room to maneuver in achieving the trilateral cooperation, especially the cooperation with South Korea. At the same time, the South Korea, the Yoon administration need to elaborate more sophisticated domestic policy in order to increase the support of the new government. Otherwise, there will be still remaining risks to resume the trilateral military cooperation from the perspective of the South Korean people.
And Dr. Bennett, are you optimistic about the prospects for trilateral cooperation between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo? And, well, it seems that South Korea is showing a lot of enthusiasm towards this, but there still seems to be historical issues, the upcoming upper house elections in Japan that might slow things down in terms of improving South Korea-Japan ties. But would you say that the mood in Tokyo is changing overall?
I think the mood in Tokyo is changing, but it's a question of how rapidly it changes. Politics are politics, and politics are always a difficulty in trying to manage relationships. I think, however, that we need to increasingly talk about how critical that cooperation is. The United States needs to be able to send its forces to Korea in a contingency. Any crisis, it needs to be able to do that. And it is almost impossible to do that without Japanese support of airfields and ports. There's just not enough infrastructure in South Korea for that kind of deployment. So this is not only something where we're interested in the cooperation, we need the cooperation. It's the best way to deal with North Korea, to put pressure on North Korea. Meanwhile, the US and South Korea need to also continue working hard, as we are doing now with the exercises that have been ongoing. This is an effort where building alliances take effort. Politics can get in a way for a while, but we need to work at it.
And Dr. Bennett, well, with key elections coming up in the US as well, the midterm elections, well, many wonder if there's going to be much progress on the North Korea front with for President Biden. And well, it's an age-old question. It's a question we ask time and time again. But what is the US approach to North Korea? Are we going back to strategic patience, or are we taking a new approach here?
Well, I guess I would say it's not so much a matter of going back as breaking from it. A year or so, we've basically been stuck on strategic patience. I think this is a question, though, where President Yoon could have a tremendous possibility of action. If he and his advisors can put together a strategy to increase the deterrence of North Korea, to move to a more stern deterrence, as was talked about in the summit meeting between President Biden and President Yoon, I think this is an opportunity where President Yoon could come up with that strategy, and the U.S. would probably be very anxious to support it. The U.S. is busy with a lot of other issues right now, and this may be a time for South Korea to take more initiative.
And Dr. Kim, in the meantime, what are ways that South Korea can increase its own military capabilities against incoming threats from the north, other than ramping up its fighter jets, for instance?
So the new government in South Korea now assume their power, basically criticizing some more appeasing attitude of the former the government, the Moon administration, toward the North Korea. So I think this is the good opportunity for the South Korean government to say make some redirection of the North Korea policy in a more balanced way, as well as the have better positioning in increasing the capability of the South Korean, the defense, the infrastructure, or the other things here. So in that sense, I want to see the Yoon administration to take this opportunity for their own the political capital, as well as the national interest in the near future.
Well, that was Dr. Bruce Bennett, policy analyst at RAND Corporation, and Kim Jong, professor at the University of North Korean Studies. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For a look at the news from around the world, we now turn to our Matthew Ashley standing by at the Arirang newsroom. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you guys.
Good morning, Matthew. Now we're going to start things off over in Italy. I believe a drought there has forced the government to declare a state of emergency.
Well, that's right, SJ. The measure announced on Monday comes as Italy's longest river has seen its lowest water levels in over 70 years. Now, the 650-kilometer-long River Po, which runs across the north of the country, accounts for around 1/3 of Italy's agricultural production. But due to the low water levels, seawater has begun seeping inland, damaging crops. The emergency declarations have been assigned to 5 regions where the drought is at its worst, while some cities and towns have already implemented water use restrictions. Meanwhile, in central Italy, Rome's Tiber River is becoming increasingly shallow. According to a state-run research body, over the past 30 years, Italy has received only half the average rainfall. Now, U.S. officials are looking into a shooting incident in the West Bank in May that killed veteran Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh have said that the bullet that killed her was likely fired by the Israeli military. However, due to the damaged nature of the bullet, the independent third-party examiners were unable to make a full determination. They added that there is, quote, no reason to believe that she was targeted. Palestinian officials have since criticized the report, saying she was deliberately targeted. Israel has denied the claims and instead responded that it will continue with its own investigation into the matter. The report comes as the Palestinian-American correspondent was killed while covering an Israeli military raid on May 11th in the occupied West Bank. Rescue operations continue following an avalanche in the Italian Alps on Sunday that killed at least 7 people. Another 8 people were seriously injured and 14 remain unaccounted for. Helicopters and search teams equipped with drones are still looking for the missing climbers but have been hindered by thunderstorms. So far, 3 of the victims have been identified as Italian, whilst authorities work to identify the rest. The disaster comes as high temperatures have caused the Marmolada Glacier, where the avalanche occurred, to shrink in recent years. Competitive eater Joey Chestnut has clinched his 7th consecutive win at Nathan's famous International Hot Dog Eating Contest. The traditional Independence Day event in New York's Coney Island took place on Monday and saw Chestnut consume 63 hot dogs and buns in 10 minutes. Also known as Jaws, he holds 50 world records in eating competitions and has now won this event 15 times in total. Meanwhile, in the women's division, 2020 winner Miki Sudo made a comeback to reclaim her title, eating 40 hot dogs and buns. However, not everyone was happy with the contest, as a protester wearing a Darth Vader mask bumped Chestnut out of his position as he was eating his 18th hot dog. But Chestnut managed to pull them to the ground before continuing.
Good morning. Well, boiling heat continues day and night. Walking around for 5 to 10 minutes during the day can easily result in sunburn and exhaustion. And of course, the tropical nights are causing sleeping difficulties. What a harsh start to July. So the number of people with heat-related illnesses is rapidly on the rise. The least we can do is to stay hydrated, but avoid caffeinated drinks and alcohol, as they can have a dehydrating effect on the body. Well, passing rain is in the forecast today. Seoul will be seeing rain around the mid-afternoon, and when it starts to rain, it could really pour down, and hopefully that will give us some relief from the heat today. Well, lots of clouds to begin the day in the capital. Most regions are waking up to a low of above 25 degrees Celsius again. And Seoul has been under a heat wave warning for 3 consecutive days, 6 days in a row in Daegu. And both cities will see a high of 34 degrees Celsius this afternoon. Take good care of your health. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe. And that wraps up our newscast for this hour, but we'll be back tomorrow with our Wednesday's edition of New Day at Arirang.
Thanks as always for joining us this morning, but do stick around for more updates throughout the day. Have a great rest of your day wherever you are, and as always, take care.